A dozen Gaishain in their white robes leading pack mules struggled to keep up. One wore black, not white. Isendre labored hardest of all. Egwene could pick Adeline out and two or three others who had been guarding Rand's tent the night of the attack. Each clutched a doll in addition to her weapons, a rough-made doll clothed in full skirts and white blouse. They looked even more stone-faced than usual, trying to pretend that they held no such thing. She was not sure what that was about. The maidens who stood that guard had come in a group to see Bear and Amis when their stint was done, and had spent a long time with them. The next morning, while camp was still breaking in the grayness before dawn, they had begun making those dolls. She had not been able to ask, of course,
Hey,
but she
OG, how you
commented
doing?
on it to one, a red-haired Tomanel of the Sarai sept named Myra, and the woman said it was
Hope
to
you're doing
remind her
good,
that she
bro.
was not a child. Her tone made it clear that she did not want to talk. One of the maidens carrying a doll was no more than 16, yet Myra was at least as old as Adeline. It made little sense, and that was frustrating. Every time Egwene thought she understood Aiel ways,
Hell yeah.
something demonstrated that she did not.
She did a dab
Despite
shit.
herself, her eyes were drawn back to the mouth of the pass. The row of stakes was still there, just visible, stretching from steep mountain slope to steep mountain slope, except where Aiel had kicked some of them down. Kuladin had left another message, men and women impaled across their path, standing there 7 days dead. The tall gray walls of Selene clung to the hills at the right of the pass, nothing showing above them. Moiraine said it had held only a shadow of its one-time glory, yet it had still been a considerable town, much larger in time. No more remained of it, however. No survivors either, except whoever the Shaido had carried off, although here some had probably run for places they thought safe. There had been farms on these hills. Most of eastern Prairie had been abandoned after the Aiel War, but a town needed farms for food. Now soot-streaked chimneys thrust up from blackened stone farmhouse walls. Here a few charred rafters remained above a stone barn. There barn and farmhouse had collapsed from the heat. The hill where she sat Mist's saddle had been sheep pasture. Near the fence at the foot of the hill, flies still buzzed over the refuse of butchering. Not an animal remained in any pasture, not a chicken scratching in a barnyard. The crop fields were burned stubble. Couladin and the Shaido were Aiel, but so were Avienda, and Bear, and Damis, and Mylane, and Ruark, who said she reminded him of one of his daughters. They had been disgusted at the impalements, yet even they seemed to think it little more than the tree killers deserved. Perhaps the only way to truly know the Aiel was to be born Aiel. Casting a last glance at the destroyed town, she rode slowly down to the rough stone fence and let herself out of the gate, leaning down to refasten the rawhide thong out of habit. The irony was that Moiraine had said that Selene might actually go over to Couladin. In the shifting currents of Desdemar, in balancing an Aiel invader against a man who had sent Tyrans into Cairhien for whatever reason, the decision could have tipped either way had Couladin given them a chance to choose. She rode along the broad road until she caught up with Rand in his red coat today, and joined Avienda and Amis, and 30 or more wise ones she barely knew besides the other two dreamwalkers, all following at a short distance. Matt, with his hat and his black-hafted spear, and Jason Mateo, leather-cased harp slung on his back, and crimson
Hell yeah,
banners
OG.
in the
Have a
breeze,
good one,
were
bro.
riding. But
Definitely
hurrying
appreciate you
Aiel
stopping
passed the
by.
party by on both sides, because Rand led his dapple stallion, talking with the clan chiefs. Skirts or no skirts, the wise ones would have made a good job of keeping up with the passing columns if they were not sticking to Rand like pine sap. They barely glanced at Egwene, their eyes and ears focused on him and the 6 chiefs. And whoever comes through after Timolan, Rand was saying in a firm voice, has to be told the same thing. The dogs left to watch at the time had returned to report the Mayagoma entering the town behind. I've come to stop Couladin before loot it. A hard message, Bale said. Well, if you mean we cannot take the fifth. Han and the rest, even Ruark, nodded. The fifth I give you. Rand did not raise his voice, yet suddenly his words were driven nails. But no part of that is to be food. We will live on what can be found wild or hunted or bought, if there is anyone with food to sell, until I can have the Tyrans increase what they're bringing up from Tyr. If any man takes a penny more than the fifth, or a loaf of bread without payment, if he burns so much as a hut because it belongs to a tree killer, or kills a man who is not trying to kill him, that man will I hang, whoever he is. Dark to tell the clans this, Diarek said, almost as stony. I came to follow he who comes with the dawn, not to coddle oath-breakers. Bale and Jiran opened their mouths as if to agree, but each saw the other and snapped his teeth shut again. Mark what I said, Diarek, Rand said. I came to save this land, not ruin it further. What I say stands for every clan, including the Mayagoma, and any more who follow. Every clan, you mark me well. This time no one spoke, and he swung back into Giadin's saddle, letting the stallion walk on among the chiefs. Those Aiel faces showed no expression. Egwene drew breath. Those men were all old enough to be his father and more, leaders of their people as surely as kings for all they disclaimed it, hardened leaders in battle. It seemed only yesterday that he had been a boy in more than age, a youth who asked and hoped, rather than commanded and expected to be obeyed. He was changing faster than she could keep up with now. A good thing, if he kept these men from doing to other cities what Couladin had done to Tyon and Selene. She told herself that. She only wished he could do it without showing more arrogance every day. How soon before he expected her to obey him as Moiraine did? Or all Aes Sedai? She hoped it was only arrogance. Wanting to talk, she kicked a foot free of its stirrup and held a hand down for Aviendha, but the Aiel woman shook her head. She did not like to ride. And maybe all those wise ones striding in a pack made her reluctant too. Some of them would not have ridden had both their legs been broken. With a sigh, Egwene climbed down, leaving Mist by the reins, settling her skirts a little grumpily. The soft knee-high Aiel boots she wore looked comfortable and were, but not for walking very far on that hard, uneven pavement. He truly is in command, she said. Aviendha barely shifted her eyes from Rand's back. I do not know him. I cannot know him. Look at the thing he carries. She meant the sword, of course. Rand did not precisely carry it. It hung at the pommel of his saddle in a plain scabbard of brown boarhide, the long hilt covered in the same leather, rising as high as his waist. He had had hilt and scabbard made by a man from Tyon on a journey through the pass. Egwene wondered why, when he could channel a sword of fire and do other things that made swords seem toys. You did give it to him, Aviendha. Her friend scowled. He tries to make me accept the hilt, too. He used it. It is his. Used it in front of me as if to mock me with a sword in his hand. You are not angry about the sword. She did not think Aviendha was. She had not said a word about it that night in Rand's tent. You are still upset over how he spoke to you, and I do understand. I know he is sorry. He sometimes speaks without thinking, but if you would only let him apologize... I do not want his apologies, Aviendha muttered. I do not want... I can bear this no more. I cannot sleep in his tent any longer. Suddenly she took Egwene's arm, and if Egwene had not known better, she would have thought her on the brink of tears. You must speak to them for me. To Amis and Bear and Merlane. They will listen to you. You are Aes Sedai. They must let me return to their tents. They must. Who must do what? Cerylea said, dropping back from the others to walk alongside them. The wise one of Shenda Hold had thin white hair and a face like leather drawn tight over her skull. and clear green eyes that could knock a horse down at 10 paces. That was the way she normally looked at anyone. When Cerelia was angry, other wise ones sat quietly, and clan chiefs made excuses to leave. Mylane and another wise one, a graying Blackwater Nakai, started to join them too, until Cerelia turned those eyes on them. If you were not so busy thinking of that new husband, Mylane, you would know Amis wants to talk with you. You also, Aaron. Mylane flushed bright red and scurried back to the others, but the older woman got there first. Cerelia watched them go, then put her full attention on Aviendha. Now we can have a quiet talk. So you do not want to do something. Something you were told to do, of course. And you think this child Aes Sedai can get you out of doing it. Cerelia, Aviendha got no further. In my day, girls jumped when a wise one said jump, and continued jumping until they were told to stop. As I am still alive, it is still my day. Need I make myself clearer? Aviendha took a deep breath. No, Cerelia, she said meekly. The old woman's eyes came to rest on Egwene. And you? Do you think you are going to beg her off? No, Cerelia. Egwene felt as though she should curtsy. Good, Cerelia said, not sounding satisfied, just as if it was what she had expected. It almost certainly was. Now I can speak to you of what I really want to know. I hear the Kara Karn has given you an interest gift like no other ever heard of. Rubies and moondrops. Aviendha jumped as if a mouse had run up her leg. Well, she probably would not, but it was the way Egwene would have jumped in that circumstance. The Aiel explained about Laemon's sword and the scabbard so hastily that her words tripped over one another. Cerelia shifted her shawl, muttering about girls touching swords even wrapped in blankets, and about having a sharp word with young Bear. So he has not captured your eye. A pity. It would bind him to us. He sees too many people as his now. For a moment she eyed Aviendha up and down. I will have Farron look at you. His great father is my sister's son. You have other duties to the people than learning to be a wise one. Those hips were made for babes. Aviendha stumbled over an upraised paving stone and just caught herself short of falling. I will think on him when there is time, she said breathlessly. I have much to learn yet of being a wise one, and Farron is Sayadun, and the Black Eyes have vowed not to sleep beneath roof or tent until Couladin is dead. Couladin was Sayadun. The leathery-faced wise one nodded as though everything had been settled. You, young Aes Sedai, you know the Kara Karn well, it is said. Will he do as he has threatened? Hang even a clan chief? I think, maybe, that he will. More quickly, Egwene added, but I am sure he can be brought to see reason. She was not sure of any such thing, or even that it was reason. What he had said sounded only just, but justice would do him no good if he found the others turning against him as well as the Shaido. Cerelia glanced at her in surprise, then turned to gaze on the chiefs around Rand's horse that should have knocked the lot of them flat. You mistake me. He must show that mangy pack of wolves that he is the chief wolf. A chief must be harder than other men, young Aes Sedai, and the Kara Karn harder than other chiefs. Every day a few more men and even maidens are taken by the bleakness, but they are the soft outer bark of the ironwood. What remains is the hard inner core, and he must be hard to lead them. Egwene noticed that she did not include herself or the other wise ones among those who would be led. Muttering to herself about mangy wolves, Cerelia strode ahead, and soon had all the wise ones listening as they walked. Whatever she was saying, it did not carry. Who is this Farron? Egwene asked. I've never heard you speak of him. What does he look like? Frowning at Cerelia's back, more than half hidden by the women clustered around her, Aviendha spoke absently. He looks much like Ruark, only younger, taller, and more handsome, with much redder hair. For over a year, he has been trying to attract Denyla's interest, but I think she will teach him to sing before she gives up the spear. I don't understand. Do you mean to share him with Denyla? It still felt odd, speaking so casually of that. Avienda stumbled again and stared at him. Share him? I want no part of him. His face is beautiful, but he laughs like a braying mule and picks at his ears. But from the way you talked to Cerilia, I thought you liked him. Why didn't you tell her what you just told me? The other woman's low laugh sounded pained. Egwene, if she thought I was trying to balk in this, she would make the bridal ring herself and drag both Farron and me by the neck to be wed. Have you ever seen anyone say no to Cerilia? Could you? Egwene opened her mouth to say that of course she could, and promptly closed it again. Making Nynaeve step back was one thing, and trying the same with Cerilia quite another. It would be like standing in the path of a landslide and telling it to stop. She changed the subject. She said, I was speaking to Amice and the others for you. Not that she really thought it would do much good now. The right time had been before it began.
That was a rough one.
At least Avienda saw the impropriety of the situation finally. Perhaps if we go to them, I am sure they will listen. No, Egwene. I must obey the wise ones. Ji'ito requires it. Just as if she had not been asking for intercession a moment earlier. Just as if she had not all but begged the wise ones not to make her sleep in Rand's tent. But why is my duty to the people never what I wish? Why must it be what I would rather die before doing? Avienda, no one is going to marry or have babies. Not even Cerilia. Egwene wished she had sounded her limp on that last. You do not understand, the other woman said softly, and I cannot explain it to you. She gathered her shawl around her and would not speak of it. She was willing to discuss their future, or whether Couladin would turn and give battle, or how marriage had affected Mylene, who seemed to have to work at being prickly now, or anything at all, except what it was that she could not or would not explain. Chapter 24. A message sent. The land changed as the sun began to sink. The hills grew lower, the thickets larger. Often the toppled stone fences of what had been fields had become mounds sprouting wild hedges, or ran through long stands of oak and leatherleaf and hickory, pine and paperbark and trees Egwene did not know. The few farmhouses had no roofs, and trees 10 or 15 paces high grew in them here, little woods enclosed inside the stone walls, complete with twittering birds and black-tailed squirrels. The occasional rivulet caused as much talk among the Aiel as the small forests did, and the grass. They had heard tales of the wetlands, read of them in books bought from merchants and peddlers like Hadnan Kader, but few had actually seen them since the hunt for Laman. They adapted quickly, though. The growing brown of the tents blended with the dead leaves under the trees and with the dying grass and weeds. The camp spread over miles, marked by thousands of small cook fires in the golden dusk. Egwene was more than happy to crawl into her tent once the Guy Shine had it up. Inside, the lamps were lit and a small fire burned in the fire pit. Unlacing her soft boots, she tugged them off and her woolen stockings as well, and sprawled on the bright layered rugs, wriggling her toes. She wished she had a basin of water to soak her feet. She could not pretend to be as hardy as the Aiel, but she was growing soft if a few hours of walking made her feet feel twice their size. Of course, water would be no problem here, or it should not be. She remembered that shrunken stream. But surely she could even have a proper bath again. Coenda, meek and silent in her white robes, brought her supper, some of that pale flat bread made from zemai flour, and in a red-striped bowl, a thick stew that she ate mechanically, though she felt more tired than hungry. She recognized the dried peppers and beans, but did not ask what the dark meat was. Rabbit, she told herself firmly, and hoped that it was. The Aiel ate things that would put more curl in her hair than Elaine had. She was willing to bet that Rand could not even look at what he was eating. Men were always picky eaters. Once done with the stew, she stretched out near an ornately worked silver lamp that had a polished silver disc to reflect and increase its light. She had felt a little guilty once she realized that most of the Aiel had no light at night but their fires. Few had brought lamps or oil except the wise ones and the chiefs of clans and septs. There was no point to sitting in the dim illumination of the fire pit when she could have proper light. That reminded her. The nights here would not be so drastic a contrast with the days as in the waste. The tent was already beginning to feel uncomfortably warm. She channeled briefly flows of air to smother the fire, and dug into her saddlebags for the worn, leather-bound book that she had borrowed from Avienda. It was a small, fat volume with crowded lines of small print, hard to read except in good light, but easily portable. The Flame, the Blade, and the Heart, it was called, a collection of tales about Brigitte and Guidel Kane, Ancelan and Barachel, Rogosh Eagle-Eye and Dunsinin, and a dozen more. Avienda claimed that she liked it for the adventures and battles, and maybe she did, but every last story told of the love of a man and a woman, too. Egwene was willing to admit that that was what she liked, the sometimes stormy, sometimes tender threads of undying love. To herself she would admit it anyway. It was hardly the sort of enjoyment a woman with any pretensions to sense at all could confess publicly. In truth, she did not feel like reading any more than she had felt like eating. All she really wanted to do was bathe and sleep, and she might be willing to forego bathing. But tonight she and Amis were to meet Nynaeve in Tel Iran Riod. It would not be night yet wherever Nynaeve was on her way to Gildan, and that meant remaining awake. Elaine had made the menagerie sound quite exciting at their last meeting, though Egwene hardly thought that Galad's presence was reason enough to go herring off like that. Nynaeve and Elaine had simply grown to like adventure, in her opinion. It was too bad about Sylvia. They needed a firm hand to settle them down. Odd that she should think of Nynaeve so. Nynaeve had always been the one with the firm hand. But since that episode in the Tower of Tel Iran Riod, Nynaeve had become less and less someone she had to struggle against. Guiltily, she realized as she turned a page that she was looking forward to seeing Nynaeve tonight. Not because Nynaeve was a friend, but because she wanted to see if the effects had lingered. If Nynaeve tugged at her braid, she would arch a cool eyebrow at her and, "Light, I hope it's held. If she lets out about that jaunt, Amis and Bear and Mylane will take turns skinning me if they don't just tell me to go." Her eyes kept trying to drift shut as she read, fuzzily half-dreaming the stories in the book. She could be as strong as Mylane, as strong and brave as Dunsinin or Neraine or Melisinde or even Brigitte, as strong as Avienda. Would Nynaeve have sense enough to hold her tongue in front of Amis tonight? She had a vague thought of taking Nynaeve by the scruff of the neck and shaking her. Silly. Nynaeve was years the older. Arch an eyebrow at her. Dunsinin, Brigitte, as hardy and strong as a maiden of the spear. Her head slipped down to the pages, and she tried to cradle the small book under her cheek as her breathing slowed and deepened. She gave a start at finding herself among the great red stone columns of the Heart of the Stone in the strange light of Tel Iran Riod, and another at realizing that she wore the Khadin Sur. Amis would not be pleased to see her in that, not amused at all. Hastily she changed it, and was surprised when her clothes flickered back and forth between the algoda blouse and bulky wool skirt, and a fine gown of brocaded blue silk, before finally settling on the Aiel garb, complete with her ivory bracelet of flames and her gold and ivory necklace. That indecision had not happened to her in some time. For a moment she thought of stepping out of the world of dreams, but she suspected she was soundly asleep, back in her tent. Very likely she would only step into a dream of her own, and she did not yet always have awareness in her dreams. Without that, she could not return to Tel Iran Riod. She was not about to leave Amis and Nynaeve alone together. Who knew what Nynaeve would say if Amis got her temper up? When the Wise One arrived, she would simply say that she had just arrived herself. The Wise Ones had always been a bit ahead of her, or arrived at the same time before this. But surely if Amis believed she had only been there a second, it would not matter. She had almost grown accustomed to the feel of unseen eyes in this vast chamber. Only the columns and the shadows and all this empty space. Still, she hoped that Amis was not too long in coming, nor naive. But they would be. Time could be as strange in Tel Ayranriod as in any dream, but it had to be a good hour yet before the arranged meeting. Perhaps she had time to... Suddenly she realized that she could hear voices, like faint whispers among the trees. Embracing Saidar, she moved cautiously toward the sound, toward the place where Rand had left Kalandor beneath the great dome. The Wise Ones claimed that control of Tel Ayranriod was as strong as the One Power here, but she knew her abilities with the power far better, and trusted them more. Still hidden well back among the thick redstone columns, she stopped and stared. It was not a pair of black sisters, as she had feared, and not Nynaeve either. Instead, Elaine stood near the glittering shaft of Kalandor rising out of the floorstone, deep in quiet conversation with as oddly dressed a woman as Egwene had ever seen. She wore a short white coat of peculiar cut and wide yellow trousers gathered in folds at her ankles, above short boots with raised heels. An intricate braid of golden hair hung down her back, and she held a bow that gleamed like polished silver. The arrows in the quiver shone, too. Egwene squeezed her eyes shut. First the difficulty with her dress, and now this. Not because she had been reading about Brigitta. A silver bow told the name for certain, was no reason to imagine that she saw her. Brigitta waited, somewhere, for the Horn of Valir to call her and the other heroes to the last battle. But when Egwene opened her eyes again, Elaine and the oddly dressed woman were still there. She could not quite make out what they were saying, but she believed her eyes this time. She was on the point of going out to announce herself when a voice spoke behind her. "Did you decide to come early? Alone?" Egwene whirled to face Amis, her sun-darkened face too youthful for her white hair, and leathery-cheeked bare. Both stood with their arms folded beneath their breasts. Even the way their shawls were pulled tight spoke of displeasure. "I fell asleep," Egwene said. It was too much before time for her story to work. Even as she explained hastily about dozing off and why she had not gone back, minus the part about not wanting Nynaeve and Amis to talk alone, she was surprised to feel a tinge of shame that she had intended to lie, and relief that she had not. Not that the truth would necessarily save her. Amis was not as strict as Bear, not quite, but she was perfectly capable of setting her to piling up rocks the rest of the night. Many of the Wise Ones were great believers in useless labor for punishment. You could not tell yourself you were doing anything other than being punished while you were burying ashes with a spoon. That was provided they did not simply refuse to teach her anymore, of course. The ashes would be much preferable. She could not hold back a sigh of relief when Amis nodded and said, "It can happen. But next time return and dream your own dreams. I could have heard what Nynaeve has to say and tell her what we know. If Mylene was not with Bale and Dorinda tonight, she would be here as well. You frightened Bear. She is proud of your progress, and if anything happened to you..." Bear did not look proud. If anything, she scowled even more deeply as Amis paused. "You were lucky Coinda found you when she returned to clear away your supper, and was worried when she could not rouse you to move to your blankets. If I thought you had been here more than a few minutes alone..." The glare sharpened in dire promise for a moment, and then her voice turned grumpy. "Now I suppose we have to wait for Nynaeve to arrive, just to stop you begging if we send you back. If we must, we must, but we will use the time to advantage. Concentrate your mind on..." "It isn't Nynaeve," Egwene said hastily. She did not want to know what a lesson would be like with Bear in this mood. "It is Elaine, and..." She trailed off as she turned. Elaine, in elegant green silk suitable for a ball, was pacing up and down not far from Callandor. Brigitta was nowhere to be seen. I did not imagine her. She is here already, Amis said, moving to where she could see too. Another young fool, Bear muttered. Girls today have no more brains or discipline than goats. She stalked out ahead of Egwene and Amis and planted herself across Callandor's glittering shape from Elaine, fists on hips. You are not my pupil, Elaine of Andor, though you've wheedled enough out of us to keep you from killing yourself here if you are careful. But if you were, I would welt you from the toes up and send you back to your mother until you were grown enough to be let out of her sight, which I think might take as many more years as you have lived already. I know you have been coming into the world of dreams alone, you and Nynaeve. You are both fools to do it. Elaine gave a start when they first appeared, but as Bear's tirade washed over her, she drew herself up, that chilly tilt to her chin. Her gown became red and took on a finer sheen, and grew embroidery down the sleeves and across the high bodice, including rearing lions and white and gold lilies, her own sigil. A thin golden diadem rested in her red gold curls, a single rearing lion set in moondrops above her brows. She did not yet have the best control over such things. Then again, maybe she wore exactly what she intended this time. I do thank you for your concern, she said regally. Yet it is true that I am not your pupil, Bear of the Hydo Sharad. I am grateful for your instruction, but I must go my own way on the tasks given me by the Amerlin seat. A dead woman, Bear said coldly. You claim obedience to a dead woman. Egwene could all but feel Bear's hackles standing erect in anger. If she did not do something, Bear might decide to teach Elaine a painful lesson. The last thing they needed was that sort of squabble. Why are you here instead of Nynaeve? She'd been going to ask what Elaine was doing there, but that would have given Bear an opening, and maybe sounded as if she were on the Wise One's side. What she wanted to ask was what Elaine had been doing talking to Brigitta. I did not imagine it. Maybe it had been someone dreaming she was Brigitta, but only those who entered Tel Riyadh knowingly remained for more than minutes, and Elaine surely would not have been speaking with one of them. Where did Brigitta and the others wait? Nynaeve is nursing a sore head. The diadem vanished, and Elaine's gown became simpler with only a few golden scrolls around the bodice. Is she ill? Egwene asked anxiously. Only with a headache and a bruise or two, Elaine giggled and winced at the same time. Oh, Egwene, you would not have believed it. All 4 of the Chavanas had come to have supper with us, to flirt with Nynaeve, really. They tried flirting with me the first few days, but Tom had a talk with them and they stopped. He did not have any right to do that. Not that I wanted them to flirt, you understand. Anyway, there they were, flirting with Nynaeve, or trying to because she paid them no more mind than buzzing flies, when Latelle stalked up and began hitting Nynaeve with a stick, calling her all sorts of terrible names. Was she hurt? Egwene was not sure which of them she meant. If Nynaeve's temper was roused. Not her. The Chavanas tried to pull her off Latelle, and Tarek will likely limp for days, not to mention Brug's swollen lip. Petra had to carry Latelle to her wagon, and I doubt she'll put her nose out for some time. Elaine shook her head. Luca did not know who to blame. One of his acrobats lamed, and his bear trainer weeping on her bed, so he blamed everybody, and I thought Nynaeve was going to box his ears as well. At least she did not channel. I thought she was going to once or twice, until she had Latelle down on the ground. Amis and Bear exchanged unreadable glances. This certainly was not how they expected Aes Sedai to behave. Egwene felt a little confused herself, but it was mainly over keeping up with all these people she had only heard of briefly before. Odd people, traveling with lions, dogs, and bears, and an illuminator. She did not believe this Petra could possibly be as strong as Elaine claimed, But then Tom was eating fire as well as juggling, and what Elaine and Julian were doing sounded as strange, even if she was using the power. If Nynaeve had come close to channeling, Elaine must have seen the glow of her embracing saidar. Whether they had real reason to be hiding or not, they would not remain hidden long if one of them channeled and let people see it. The tower's eyes and ears would certainly hear. That sort of news traveled quickly, especially if they were not out of Amadisia yet. You tell Nynaeve from me. She had best hold her temper, or I'll have some words to say to her that she will not like. Elaine looked startled. Nynaeve had certainly not told her what had passed between them, and Egwene added, "If she channels, you can be sure Elida will hear of it as soon as a pigeon can fly to Tar Valon." She could not say more. As it was, it brought another exchange of glances between Amis and Bear. What they really thought of a tower divided, and an Amyrlin who, as far as they knew, had given orders for Aes Sedai to be drugged, they had never let on. They could make Moiraine look like the village gossip when they wished. In fact, I wish I had both of you alone. If we were in the tower in our old rooms, I'd say a few words to the pair of you. Elaine stiffened, as queenly and cool as she had been with Bear. You may say them to me whenever you wish. Had she understood? Alone, away from the Wise Ones, in the tower, Egwene could only hope. Best to change the subject and hope the Wise Ones were not picking over her words as carefully as she hoped that Elaine was. Will this fight with Latel cause problems? What had Nynaeve been thinking of? Back home, she would have had any woman her age who did the same, up before the women circled so fast that her eyes would pop. You must be almost to Gildan by now. 3 more days, Luca says, if we are lucky. The menagerie does not move very fast. Perhaps you should leave now. Perhaps, Elaine said slowly. I really would like to high walk just once in front of... With a shake of her head, she glanced at Callandor. The neckline of her gown dipped precipitously, then rose again. I do not know, Egwene. We could not travel much faster alone than we are traveling, and we don't know where to go exactly yet. That meant Nynaeve had not remembered where the blooms were gathering, if Elida's report had been right. Not to mention that Nynaeve might burst if we had to abandon the wagon and buy saddle horses or another coach. Besides, we are both learning a great deal about the Seanchan. Sarandon served as a Swadit handler at the court of the 9 Moons, where the Seanchan Empress sits. Yesterday she showed us things that she took when she fled Falma. Egwene, she has an Idam. Egwene stepped forward, her skirts brushing Callandor. Rand's traps were not physical, whatever Nynaeve seemed to think. Can you be sure she was not a Suldam? Egwene trembled with anger. I am certain, Elaine said soothingly. I put the Idam on her myself, and it had no effect. That was a little secret that the Seanchan themselves did not know, or hid well. Their Damani were women born with the spark, women who would channel eventually, even if untaught. But the Suldam, who controlled the Damani, they were the women who needed to be taught. The Seanchan thought that women who could channel were dangerous animals who had to be controlled, and yet unknowingly gave many of them honored positions. I do not understand this interest in the Seanchan. Amis said the name awkwardly. She had never heard it until Elaine spoke it at their last meeting. What they do is terrible, but they are gone. Rand al'Thor defeated them and they fled. Egwene turned her back and stared at the huge polished columns running off into shadow. Gone is not to say they will never come back. She did not want them to see her face, not even Elaine. We must know whatever we can learn in case they ever return. They had put an Idam on her in Falma. They had meant to send her over the Arith Ocean to Seanchan to spend the rest of her life as a dog on a leash. Fury welled up in her every time she thought of them, and fear, too. The fear that if they did return, they would succeed in taking and holding her this time. That was what she could not allow them to see, the stark terror that she knew was in her eyes. Elaine put a hand on her arm. "We will be ready for them if they do come back," she said gently. "They will not find us in surprise and ignorance again." Egwene patted her hand, though she wanted to clutch it. Elaine understood more than Egwene wished, yet it was comforting that she did. "Let us finish what we are here for," Bear said briskly. "You need to be asleep in truth, Egwene. We had the guy Shine undress you and put you in your blankets." Surprisingly, Amis sounded as gentle as Elaine. "When you return to your body, you can sleep until morning." Egwene's cheeks colored. Given Aiel's ways, it was as likely as not that some of those guys Shine had been men. She would have to speak to them about that. Delicately, of course. They would not understand, and it was not a thing she could be comfortable explaining. The fear was gone, she realized. Apparently, I'm more afraid of being embarrassed than I am of the Seanchan. It was not true, but she held to the thought. There was really little to tell Elaine. That they were in Cairhien finally, that Quilladin had devastated Celian and ravaged the surrounding land, that the Shaido were still days ahead and moving west. The wise ones knew more than she. They had not taken to their tents right away. There had been skirmishes in the evening, small ones and only a few, with mounted men who quickly fled, and other men on horses who had been sighted ran without fighting. There had been no prisoners taken. Warraine and Lan seemed to think that the riders could have been bandits, or supporters of one or another of the houses trying to claim the Sun Throne. All had been equally ragged. Whoever they were, word would soon spread that there were more Aiel in Cairhien. They had to learn sooner or later, was Elaine's only comment. Egwene watched Elaine as she and the Wise Ones faded away. To her it seemed as though Elaine and the Heart of the Stone became more and more attenuated, but her golden-haired friend gave no sign as to whether she had understood the message. Chapter 25. Dreams of Galad. Instead of returning to her own body, Egwene floated in darkness. She seemed to be darkness herself, without substance. Whether her body lay up or down or sideways from her, she did not know. There was no direction here, but she knew that it was near, that she could step into it easily. All around her in the blackness, fireflies seemingly twinkled, a vast horde fading away into unimaginable distance. Those were dreams. Dreams of the Aiel in the camp. Dreams of men and women across Cairhien, across the world, all glittering there. She could pick out some among the nearer and name the dreamer now. In one way, those sparkles were just as alike as fireflies. That was what had given her so much trouble in the beginning. But in another, somehow, they now seemed as individual as faces. Rand's dreams and Warraine's appeared muted, dimmed by the wards they had woven. Amis's and Bear's were bright and regular in their pulsing. They had taken their own advice, apparently. Had she not seen those, she would have been into her body in an instant. Those two could rove this darkness much more ably than she. She would not have known they were there until they pounced on her. If she ever learned to recognize Elaine and Nynaeve in the same way, she would be able to find them in that great constellation wherever they were in the world. But tonight she did not mean to observe anyone's dream. Carefully she formed a well-remembered image in her mind, and she was back in Tel Run-Riod, inside the small, windowless room in the tower where she had lived as a novice. A narrow bed was built against one white-painted wall. A washstand and a three-legged stool stood opposite the door, and the current occupants' dresses and shifts of white wool hung with a white cloak on pegs. There could as easily have been none. The tower had not been able to fill the novices' quarters in many years. The floor was almost as pale as walls and clothes. Every day the novice who lived there would scrub that floor on hands and knees. Egwene had done so herself, and Elaine in the next room. If a queen came to train in the tower, she would start in a room like this, scrubbing the floor. The garments were arranged differently when she glanced at them again, but she ignored that. Ready to embrace saidar in a heartbeat, she opened the door just enough to stick her head out. and drew a relieved breath when she found Elaine's head coming just as slowly out of the next doorway. Egwene hoped she did not appear as wide-eyed and uncertain. She motioned hurriedly, and Elaine scurried across in novice white that became a pale gray silk riding dress as she darted inside. Egwene hated gray dresses. That was what Damani wore. For an instant more she stayed there, scanning the railed galleries of the novices' quarters. Layer on layer they rose, and fell as many levels to the novices' court below. Not that she really expected Leandra or worse to be out there, but it never hurt to be careful. I thought this was what you meant, Elaine said as she shut the door. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to remember what I can say in front of whom? Sometimes I wish we could just tell the wise ones everything. Let them know we are only accepted and be done with it. You would be done with it, Egwene said firmly. I happen to be sleeping not 20 paces from them. Elaine shivered. That bear. She reminds me of Lini when I'd broken something I was not supposed to touch. You wait until I introduce you to Cerylea. Elaine gave her a doubtful look, but then Egwene was not sure that she would have believed Cerylea herself until she met her. There was no way to do this easily. She shifted her shawl. Tell me about meeting Brigitta. It was Brigitta, wasn't it? Elaine staggered as her blue eyes closed for a moment, and she took a breath that must have filled her to the toes. I cannot talk to you about that. What do you mean you can't talk? You have a tongue. I cannot, Egwene. You must believe me. I would if I could, but I cannot. Perhaps I can ask. If Elaine had been the kind of woman to wring her hands, she would have been doing it then. Her mouth opened and closed without any words coming out. Her eyes darted around the room as if seeking inspiration or aid. Taking a deep breath, she fixed an urgent blue gaze on Egwene. Anything I say violates confidence as I promised to hold. Even that. Please, Egwene, you must trust me, and you must not tell anyone what you think you saw. Egwene forced the stern frown from her face. I will trust you. At least she knew now for a fact that she had not been seeing things. Brigitta? Light. I hope that one day you will trust me enough to tell me. I do trust you, but... Shaking her head, Elaine sat down on the edge of the neatly made bed. We keep secrets too often, Egwene, but sometimes there is a reason. After a moment, Egwene nodded and sat next to her. When you can, was all she said, but her friend gave her a relieved hug. I told myself I was not going to ask this, Egwene. Just once I was not going to have my head full of him. The gray riding dress became a shimmering green gown. Elaine could not possibly have been aware of how deeply the neckline swooped. But is Rand well? He's alive and unharmed, if that is what you mean. I thought he was hard in Tyr, but today I heard him threaten to hang men if they go against his commands. Not that they are bad orders. He won't let anyone take food without paying or murder people. But still, they were the first to hail him as he who comes with the dawn. They followed him out of the waste without hesitation. And he threatened them, as hard as cold steel. Not a threat, Egwene. He is a king, whatever you or he or anyone else says. And a king or queen must dispense justice without fear of enemies or favor for friends. Anyone who does that has to be hard. Mother can make the city walls seem soft sometimes. He doesn't have to be so arrogant about it, Egwene said levelly. Nynaeve said I should remind him he's only a man, but I've not figured out how yet. He does have to remember he's only a man, but he has a right to expect to be obeyed. There was something of a haughty tone to Elaine's voice, until she glanced down at herself. Then her face went crimson, and the green gown suddenly had a lace neck under her chin. Are you sure you are not mistaking that for arrogance? She finished.
Alright, everyone. I'm probably going to call it into this a little early tonight. I'm actually a little tired, more tired than usual. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps coming back and chilling with me. Definitely appreciate all y'all support. Till next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.